Welcome to the Indie Writer Podcast, where we talk all things writing and indie publishing. Today, Becca and I are excited to be talking to Evalyn Broderick. Evalyn is a pediatrician and author who was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. She cut her teeth as a reader on books by authors such as Tamora Pierce, Robert Heinlein, Ursula K. Leguin, and Anne McCaffery. Together with her undying devotion to Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, this fueled her lifelong passion for science fiction and fantasy. She is a proud graduate of the City University of New York, where she earned degrees in biology and chemistry before completing her MD PhD. When not writing, she enjoys crossword puzzles, epic games of Trivial Pursuit, and traveling. Welcome, Evalyn. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to have you. So how are you, Becca?
I'm okay. I'm actually chugging a giant water bottle because, hello, MD, this is a little embarrassing. I was in the hospital because I got so dehydrated that I fell on my face.
Oh my God.
I'm great now. I'm fine now.
Are you feeling any better?
Yeah, I'm glad that that's all it was.
Oh my goodness.
Literally just fell down. Yep. So now I have like a little guided water bottle that tells me how much to drink at different times of the day because I apparently need help with a basic human survival bit.
You are not alone.
I can tell you a really embarrassing story from the last few days if it makes you feel better.
Please.
Sorry,
do.
we go out on a lot of tangents, Evalyn. So I'd been having trouble sleeping and having a lot of anxiety, so I started using some of those melatonin patches. And they were helping for a little while, and then I just started being really out of it, for a week, 2 weeks later, and I realized I was just overdosing myself on melatonin, and was basically just melatonined out all day, even after I took it off hours later.
Oh no.
But I was really worried something was seriously wrong with me, so I was glad when I figured it out.
Why am I so tired? Maybe all the extra. Okay, I feel a little better.
That's right. We'll figure this out eventually. Life and adulting.
Maybe.
Evelyn's probably shaking her head. She's like, these are basics.
Who am I talking to?
Well, I'm a pediatrician. I've never put a melatonin patch on anyone. So this is new for me too.
Oh boy. All right. Shall we dive in?
Yeah, sure. So something I realized when I was thinking about this podcast is that I read lots of Jewish books when I was a kid. And I think part of that is because my mom was like, okay, I want to find some representation for my kids. But I feel like I see less of them now, or fewer of them now as an adult. But that just got me wondering, what some of your favorite Jewish kids books were, or if you grew up liking Jewish kids lit at all.
I did not, but the books that I was exposed to were probably very different from the books that you were exposed to. So I grew up in a very insular community where anything that was considered secular, and that included Jewish books that were of different, I don't want to say types of observance, but different levels of observance were frowned upon. So the only books that were Jewish that I had access to were from very small niche Jewish publishers and had been approved by rabbis, etc. Ironically, I did have access through my library to a whole lot of other books, which is how I fell in love with sci-fi and fantasy. But I think one of the reasons why I like to write so much, or why I feel strongly about writing Jewish books, is that I would have liked to have seen myself in some of those books that I loved so much, and I didn't. So probably the opposite reason of yours.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in a very secular household. My mom is very culturally Jewish. She grew up on Long Island in a very observant family, we can get into that later. But a very culturally observant family, I'll say. And then she's an atheist Buddhist who moved to West Virginia, where I grew up, around not many other Jews at all. And so she was like, I have to teach my kid about our heritage. So here are some books that might do that. But they're all about the Holocaust is something else we can
Yeah.
talk about. So then, like, even though it gave me this sense of, like, okay, representation and, like, oh, identity, like, this is who I am, it's also, like, this sense of, and we're victims, kind of. So that was, yeah, a different kind of experience.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered some of those books, and I think they have a purpose, and I admire the writers who are capable of writing them well, but I can't read them. I grew up surrounded by a lot of Holocaust trauma, and it has just never been what I personally have wanted to read or watch because it's in a lot of media as well. So I hear that, wanting something else and something different and to showcase a different part of our lives for the rest of the world. Like, hey, there's more to us if you care to come take a peek.
And I hear that a lot with like other representation in diversity in publishing. Like, why are you only showing Black trauma? Like, can we not always also celebrate Black joy? So yeah, I feel like that's also relevant to us.
Yeah, yeah, I think every group is right now really trying to take control of their own stories, and I think it's beautiful because you get so much richer of a story when it's actually being told by the person it's about.
Yeah, that actually kind of leads me to my next question for you is, like, why do you think own voices is so important for Jewish stories? Like, have you seen bad representation, or like, what have you seen that has kind of made you shake your head? Or yeah.
Well, I think there's been a lot of drama recently around a few books that either intentionally or unintentionally, I'm not a mind reader, I don't know, had some unfortunate things in there that really played on a lot of Jewish stereotypes that are incredibly harmful and foster a lot of the anti-Semitism that we've been suffering from, since the dawn of time. So that certainly is a concern. But I like Own Voices for the joy of it. I think it's just really beautiful to get to experience a culture with someone else, and I think the beauty of Judaism is, really best explored by someone who has experienced it. And that goes for all levels, not, one particular type of observance over another. I think that's part of the topic is to get all the different voices in there and have everyone, talk about their experience without censoring each other.
Yeah, you kind of touched on this, and I'm not sure if this is who you mean, but I've been reading a little bit about Emily Duncan recently, people are upset with. And I know that it's just so, just in fantasy in general, there are lots of tropes that kind of play on anti-Semitism, whether it's like the goblins with the hook noses being bankers, or like blood libel stuff, and just all sorts of harmful stuff. But I will admit that when I first heard about this, or first really started thinking about this, it was with J.K. Rowling, and it was before I knew about her anti-trans sentiments. And I at first I felt really defensive of her, and I thought, wait a minute, she doesn't call the banker goblins Jewish, so if you are equating this with anti-Semitism, isn't that you being anti-Semitic by assuming that they're Jewish? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I strongly believe in the Jewish concept of judging everyone favorably when you can, or giving everyone the benefit of the doubt when you can. So I'm never really about ostracizing someone or shaming someone. I think the appropriate thing to do is to ask the question and hear what kind of an answer they say. And sometimes you just pointing something out, like with a critique partner or, a sensitivity reader. You will be surprised if you ask openly. The author may relook at something and say, I never thought about that, but I can see how it might be interpreted that way. And they can then go and make some changes that can fix it. But once a book is already out there, it's a whole different beast to address. So I have no way of knowing if she had any of those thoughts consciously, but subconsciously, I think it's really hard to run away from it because it's in all of our cultures. It's just unfortunately something that has been out there for a very, very long time. And so if you're not actively fighting it, it can sneak in. And I don't know that it's ever malicious, but I appreciate that we have a growing awareness so that the mistake doesn't happen again, and it can be caught at an earlier level of publishing. Some of the more recent ones that people have been pointing out are pretty obvious, like a simple Google search of like a character's name would have pointed out how like not a great idea it was, but I probably nobody thought to do that. Even just a few years ago, we've come a long way, and I think that is important to focus on that. That may not have happened now, but it happened then, and we can look at it and say, how did it happen? How can we fix that for the next time and make a pathway to move forward? So instead of shaming and name calling, it's more about being constructive and finding a next step to take together as a community.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I'm just kind of processing my own thoughts on the whole thing as you're speaking. So I think even if we're not like naming characters as like coming from a specific background, if we're using like these tropes that have been around forever, like it's still just playing into like whatever internalized prejudices we have. So yeah, I like your ideas about moving forward. So my next question is kind of going in a different direction. Do you feel like you write primarily for other Jewish people, or do you feel like you write for a larger audience? Like when you're actually in the process of writing, who do you have as a reader in mind?
Yeah, so way back when I was a teenager and I thought about writing, I used to read writing books, and then I went off and became a doctor and didn't write anything for a very long time until last year. But way back when I used to think about writing, I once read in a craft book that you need 3 readers. So when you're writing, the reader that you have to have in mind is just the one reader that you're writing for at that time, like your alpha reader. And it will help you focus your book because you know that person very well. And then the second reader that, once you're doing your edits, that you're writing for is more of a, editor, like, is this a technically perfect piece? Is the language where it needs to be? And then the third reader is like the general public so that you can sell it, or that part of the general public that you're hoping to sell to. Obviously, if it's a picture book, you're not thinking about an adult, although they have to buy it. So maybe the parent. So when I'm writing, I guess the alpha reader that you're asking about would actually probably be a young me because I write young adults primarily these days. So that would be a very specific type of person, but it's someone that I could know very well, which was what the advice was, so that you can really target what you're doing for that person. So I do do that. Do you?
I was just trying to think about who I'm thinking of. I have all these questions for you. I don't know, Jackie, who is your alpha reader, or like who is that first person you're writing for?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I wanted to hear, your take on your same question, but I loved Evelyn's answer.
A lot of people tell me it's their partner when I ask them because it's the only person they get convinced to read stuff really early. I have the opposite thing going on. I withhold all of stuff. But a lot of people say that or their kid.
Yeah, I feel like my first book was very different in that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I feel like in subsequent books, I'm kind of writing probably subconsciously towards those people who helped me with the first book of like, oh, what would this person think of how I'm taking this story and what is their feedback going to look like? So I'm sure I do that in some ways, but I just loved the way you phrased that.
I wish I remembered what book I read it in, but it was a very long time ago. It's probably not even in print anymore.
Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that now. I think, Jackie, with you, our experience is kind of similar in that we got like really tough feedback from our publisher. Yeah. And so I'm always kind of thinking like, what are they going to tell me to change about this? What am I going to eventually have to edit?
Right.
So that, but then also like a kid, but I don't write kidlets, so I think it's more like my kids in the future, almost like my legacy. That's a little bit of it too.
I love that. And then what about your original question, Becca? What is your answer on that? Are you writing primarily for a Jewish audience, or are you writing a book for the general public, or how do you view that?
Not real. Well, I mean, I'm not, but that's not. I usually think of myself more as an Appalachian author, and then so I'm always thinking about like, how can I represent Appalachia in a way that does it justice and feels fair to the people and feels real to the people who live there. But I also grew up as a Jewish kid in Appalachia, so like intersectionality, I never quite felt Appalachian enough. I never quite felt Jewish enough because I wasn't like in a Jewish community. And so I always have this kind of fear that like my book is not going to be like Appalachian enough because it's not like the general Appalachian experience, or it's not going to be Jewish enough because like it's just they're like just the way every person with an intersectional identity feels, I'm sure. And so I don't think I'm really writing for like, man, that is it's a really hard question. Maybe that's why I asked it, because I just wanted to know. I want people who read my books who are not Jewish to understand that Judaism does not look like one thing. And I want people who, I mean, this sounds kind of petty. I want people who are Jewish who read my books to feel like, to accept me, to feel like I'm one of them. Like I'm Jewish enough, I guess, is my answer. But I want everyone to read it. And yeah, here we go. This goes right into it. How do you walk the line between having complex characters and potentially reinforcing stereotypes or anti-Semitism?
So, one thing to know about me is I'm primarily a science fiction writer. So, most of what I'm writing is really far future. And one of the things I enjoy doing is having a future in my books where some of the stuff that we think about today, prejudices, not just from outside the community, but also inside the community, where certain things are like frowned upon or looked down upon that I think, ethically or morally we should not be doing, and we should not be excluding people from our community. I can have a future where that doesn't exist in my books, and or my short stories, and I actively think about that when I'm writing. I can do that because it's not the actual world. So someone can't really be like, oh, well, I lived on that block in, 1945, and that is not the way it was. I'm like, I can show you a more hopeful future. And I do like to think about that a lot. And then I think there is also a beauty in having a large cast of characters. And so not every character is perfect. If they were, your book would be really, really boring. There would be no tension, there would be no stakes, there'd be no plot if everyone was just so happy and perfect. So people are going to have flaws, but the point is to be able to show the reader what they do, with those flaws or in those bad situations that they are put into. And I think that's very doable. I think there's some things that, someone is out there is going to hear me say this and view it as a challenge and going to manage to do it. But I think there's some things that you just can't really manage to do. So like you mentioned blood libel before, like having a Jewish magic blood sorcerer who steals other people's blood is probably not going to work. That being said, I know an author who wrote, and she's Jewish, she wrote a Jewish vampire, and it's the happiest, most loveliest book, actually, and like nobody is harmed, and it's really great. So she managed.
What book is that?
It's not out yet. It's yeah. And I think part of the trouble of selling them, because I think a few people have tried, is that fear. So even when it's done well, I think a publisher might shy away, and I can't fault them for that, really.
Yeah, I could see why that would be a hard one. to get representation for. But I'm working on a romance right now, and the characters they're both, the two main characters, the love interests, are both Jewish, and they both, like, every year have listened to this holiday, it's like a Christmas ska album.
I love it already.
And then it goes, like, missing from the internet, and they have to find it, is, like, the main premise. They've, like, drifted
Everyone
apart
that's heard about this is really invested in this book already.
Yeah, it's been so fun to listen to. And so what the guy's mother in this is, I just wrote a scene today where she's essentially laying a guilt trip on him, and I'm like, crap, I'm like, it's such a trope, like the Jewish mother guilt trip, and then I'm like, but this is also what this character would do, and I need to do it. So I'm just always thinking about, like, how I can make my characters do things without it being, like, tropey or stereotypical. How do you feel about Jewish voices being included in diversity-aimed pitch contests? Since we're talking about pitching, and I'll kind of tell you, I have mixed feelings on this because, you know, I'm Ashkenazi, I look white, I benefit from being white, I benefit from things like, you know, my writing teachers didn't have assumptions about me because of my skin color. You know, I mean, I could name a million things that I benefit from, but at the same time, like, there aren't enough own voices authors out there. So I have very mixed feelings about it.
I think it depends on the contest or pitch event. So if there is like an open submission call out for own voices writers, for own voices stories, and you want to submit something to it, you just have to look at their rules and see what they're looking for. You know, sometimes they're looking for something very specific, and sometimes they're are not, and I think that's fine. But when it comes to the pitch contests, there's a lot of different ones. So some of them are particularly for own voices work. So even if you were, you know, a BIPOC author, if your story was not BIPOC, they were specifically asking for own voices stories, then you wouldn't have been able to pitch there, which, I mean, that is up to that person who's running that event, that's specifically what they're telling agents they will be able to find there. But there are other pitch events that are specifically for authors who are marginalized, but they do not have to be writing about their marginalization in their story. In fact, they are encouraged not to if they're not comfortable doing it. And those events are specifically just to open pathways to publishing for people who have had trouble getting there in the past. And so again, you have to see how they're defining that. But many of them do include religions that have been discriminated against in the past. And so I would say for those, fine to submit, but for others, not fine to submit. And you really have to be honest with yourself about you know, what they're asking for, and then also what your work is, because the agents coming to those events are looking for what the event has told them, you know, there's going to be there. So if a white person or a white presenting person was to come to an event that was specifically pitching own voices work, and then the book is about a non-white main character, the agent may make an assumption about the author, and in this day and age may not even see the author before they sign them, and then make a discovery that is unfortunate later that would make them not want to represent that book. So I think you have to be really careful about looking at what either the contest rules or the pitch event rules are and following them, and just being really open and honest about what you're writing. I'm a big proponent of people not being forced to out certain marginalizations, you know, those around gender, sexuality, mental health, disability, like that's, you know, someone's own business. And if they want to call it own voices, then you just believe them. But when it comes to an event that's specifically asking for a BIPOC author or an author just from a specific, let's say it's an anthology and they're specifically focusing on Asian diaspora or, some other group, you should not be putting yourself forward for that if you are not
Right, of course.
from that group. And unfortunately, people do. And that is just not the way to go. I mean, it's a bad look, and you're like actively harming people. But I think there's nothing wrong if an event includes multiple marginalizations, to include yourself in those.
Totally. Thank you. Let me see if I asked all my questions, Jackie. I don't know if you have any other ones you want to jump in with.
Yeah, I would just love to hear more about your work in progress and how the Jewish-owned voices angle is kind of worked into that and how that influences your writing. Because I know that you said you write sci-fi, and so you're kind of approaching that from a different angle than a lot of writers. And just how does that influence your storytelling in general?
Yeah, so I usually have about like 5, 6 things going at once, and then I like toggle around between them depending on how I am feeling.
We do that as well. You're in good company.
We just had some holidays, and we have a couple coming up as well, right? I feel like we always have holidays, but there's a couple like when the high holidays and then Passover, which is right next to like counting the Omer and Shavuot. So you feel more steeped in holidays around these times. So I went with an idea that I'd had a while ago, where I had written this short story about a Jewish girl who is in like space school, essentially, and she needs to get home back to Earth for the holiday for Passover. So the ship that comes to pick her up like has a whole host of issues, and she has to like solve them, and there's a lot going on there. But I really enjoyed that story, and I said, well, I really love these characters. I really love this spaceship. It's a sentient ship, so it's its own character. I really love the fact that I made the spaceship Jewish. So let's...
the spaceship itself?
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Love that.
Why don't we let them celebrate some more holidays together? But I didn't want to make them a full-length novel, so instead they're going to have a short story for every holiday, even the ones that people don't necessarily know that we celebrate. And I thought it would just be a nice way, like Jewish people can enjoy like just seeing their holidays in books, but other people can like learn about our holidays in a non-threatening way. So I have been enjoying working on that recently. And then that's like sort of a very happy piece, I guess. But it's, I guess, very Jewish in that sense because I managed to make a religious spaceship. And the main characters are space Jews as well. So I think you can really have Jewish people in any sort of storyline. And what I was trying to do there was, sure, the story is about holidays, but that's not actually the focus of the story. Like, they're having all these sorts of adventures surrounding Jewish holidays, but it's just Jewish people going about their interesting space lives. That, to me, was a really hopeful future where they could do that.
Yeah, I love, because we wouldn't, like most books that we read where like the main characters are going home for Christmas or whatever, we wouldn't be like, this is a Christian book. It's just like a book, and how that's like the default. So like, why can't our characters just celebrate Passover without it being like a Jewish book?
I often sit there around certain concepts or certain words, and I really struggle with myself in a way that I don't think anyone writing a Christian book ever would, where you sit there and you think, will people know what this is? How can I explain this? But my viewpoint character knows what this is. So that's really like breaking my, deep POV here if I'm starting to explain, oh, in between Passover and the next holiday, we count every day, and like giving a really long and boring explanation. And I've actually asked people about that, people who aren't Jewish, like, would this bother you? Or I've had them read something and they're like, no, I can use Google if I need to. But most of them don't actually. They enjoy learning about it through reading the story, because the characters are just doing this stuff like they would normally do it. Um, but it's something I think about a lot because you don't want to be too inaccessible to someone, but you also don't want to be too preachy about something either. And I think the way to do it is really just to have it be normal, just what you would normally do, but to show it really well and not tell it. The ancient writer advice that we all hate.
Cool. Yeah. Anything else, Jackie, before we ask for recommendations?
Have there been any resources that have been valuable to you as you've kind of just worked through just writing in general? Just, yeah, while we have you. Like, what are your favorite writing resources? This is an indie writer podcast, so we usually like to ask a similar question.
Yeah, so I think there's like multiple levels. When I was younger, I used to like reading craft books. Unfortunately, I can't recommend some of the ones that were my favorites because those authors have later proven to be extremely problematic, and I just can't bring myself to do it. And it's sad because I won't go buy those books anymore either. But I know a lot of writers and young people who read their books feel the same way about them. Now I can't focus to read those. I cannot do it. So I'm much more of like a visual learner now these days for that, or like a shorter advice person for that. So some of my favorite resources for things like that have actually been surrounding some of the contests. Like, for instance, it's Red Pit season right now because it's April, and those editors, like when they go through their queries, it's short, but they tell you exactly why a query gets rejected, and you're like, aha, did not know that. And then they'll choose a few topics like DPOV or voice or something, and make like a whole thread about it. So I really enjoy that. I also really enjoy just writers whose writing that I like, following them and seeing, every now and then some of them will delve into a concept or have a blog post about something. And I enjoy looking at those because I find they're just a little bit more relevant to me, because then I can go back and look at the book and be like, aha, this is what you did. So I really like Case and Callender's blog, not just for writing, but also writing is a hard journey and there's a lot of drama around it, and it can be really scary for a lot of people. And I just find that Kaysen's posts take a deep breath around some of those situations and really help. So I particularly enjoy that blog. And then I think the main resource that has helped me actually grow as a writer has, other than reading, obviously, which everyone should do, but you got to read the books that you like the best. So that isn't really something I can recommend unless people want sci-fi recs, which I have many of. But I think that the best way to improve yourself is to be critiqued and to give critique, because it changes the way you read. And then that changes the way you write. But I feel strongly that you don't need critique partners who are published or who are at the exact same level of publishing as you or whatever. I think some published writers are probably awful critique partners. Some people who will never be published may be the best critique partners you'll ever have. So I'm really open to working with people at all levels, but finding them can sometimes be the challenge. And I found Twitter was really helpful, surrounding some of those contests that feel like you never get into them. There's just a lot of community discussions. And if you put, something up about your story or an aesthetic or something, someone might reply, and then you get to chatting and realize you write similar stuff. So my best moral support critique group, go Team Sloth, if they're listening. um, we all found each other on Twitter surrounding a contest that none of us got into.
I love that.
And that was perfectly fine because we met each other and have grown a lot from that. So certainly a lot that way. If you're an Own Voices writer or a writer of a particular group, there's often hashtags and like days of the month that they run those hashtags, so you can find those. So like if you're a queer writer, there's one that comes out. Every now and then. It's called Queer Authors Need Betas. So that one's pretty good. I met a couple of people there. CP Match happens, or it used to happen every month. I think they had to take a bit of a break from COVID. That's open to all stories. And then there's also like a website for CP Match as well. But building those profiles was very daunting to me, so I did not. But I would say, if you're going to start looking for new critique partners. In the beginning, it was a lot. Like a lot of people would be like, "Oh yeah, me," or whatever. The best thing to do, because I think everyone's story sounds great, so I am like open to everyone, is to just exchange a few chapters first and see what it's like. And sometimes it has nothing to do with the writing. Like you might love each other's writing, but you don't love each other's feedback style, or they're at a different place in their writing than you. And sometimes it's really the person is like not a healthy relationship for you. And you should know that. And if you do a few chapters first, then you will not have overcommitted yourself to like reading 7 novels as you sort through which of those 7 people you want to have as your critique partner. But those are actually my favorite resources for sure. For indie writers, that's a little bit different because a lot of people are looking, like, oh, I want an agent or I wanted this. And then they have to start looking at like query resources. But I think for indie writers, it's a lot about how do I get my book out there? How do I learn about marketing? How do I learn about editing? And that's a little harder. I think I don't have a great hold on marketing, but I will say that there have been definitely a few podcasts like this one that have sort of highlighted the road for an indie author, and not everyone on them, is like, oh yeah, I made tons of sales and this is how I did it. Some of them are like, actually, my first book, not that many. And then I realized, like, why am I only marketing to Americans? There's English speakers everywhere. And then my second book, much better. And I find those stories helpful.
That's great. And we'll put links to all of this in our show notes for folks. Anything that has a link that you mentioned.
Is there a Jewish authors or a Jewish Own Voices hashtag on Twitter?
So there is not yet a hashtag. Most of us, when we're specifically writing something Jewish that we want to do, we'll either hashtag it MWriting, like hashtag MWriting, hashtag Jewish, or hashtag JTwitter. But that'll get you all Jews. So it'll also be like everyone who's posting holiday desserts and stuff, which I enjoy looking at, so I don't mind. But you may not want to. And then slowly we just we sort of find each other. So I have like friended many of them, and they friend me back, and we start having fun conversations.
I want to be like brought into the fold, please. I need
just friend me. But maybe we should make a hashtag.
We should. Cool.
Yeah, I can maybe ask some people. I'm not good coming up with the trendy things, like what name will people really think is cool?
Okay, let's talk about it because I would love that. I'm trying to not be on Facebook as much, but it's still
same. So that is why I say I don't know if you're on them, because I am not. I'm on one of them that I log on to every now and then when a friend tells me that like there's a conversation that I might want to see. But otherwise, I am not. And some of the bigger ones I just thought were kind of toxic. So I didn't approach them. They were like maybe people who were not okay with Jews of all different levels of observance, which I obviously am. And so I would frown upon anyone excluding anyone. But I'm just not on there as much. There is a lot of Jewish writers find each other through Highlights Foundation. It's a like Jewish writers retreat, but they also do workshops and stuff, and they move to online. Some of the programming can be expensive, but they also do. So I haven't done like the big writers retreat that they do every year, either for like it didn't work out with my work schedule or because it's kind of expensive. um, but I hear it's really good. So it's worth it to the people who go. But they also do shorter courses, and they also do like free meetup events where just like community building. So a lot of people find each other through there as well. If you're like specifically looking to either just have a Jewish community surrounding your writing or to have a critique partner that is Jewish. I actually don't. I never had one. Most of my critique partners are not Jewish, and then recently. I got one, and she read a book of mine, and of course the book I sent her was my not Jewish book because it's a second world fantasy without anyone Jewish in it. But hopefully one day I send her one of the Jewish ones. So then I suddenly found a few, and they're waiting for my next thing. But I found them on Twitter because I'm not on Facebook, and I have never had the opportunity to go to highlights. So I think it's important. Because it's hard, writing is hard. So if you can find your cheerleaders, not writing, the process, I think, of writing or getting your stuff ready to send out. So if you can find your cheerleaders, it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, my writing block people, Jackie and Carrie specifically, are like my writing people, but this is like the first, I guess like yours, my first like super Jewish book that I'm writing. So I'd love to have some people to bounce it off of.
Oh yeah, and then I don't like do rom-coms, but there are actually quite a few Jewish writers who do, and they're great. So you might enjoy that.
Awesome. I would love that. Do you have any Own Voices Jewish books that you'd like to recommend?
I have a few that I would like to see sold from friends of mine that are just getting them ready or getting them ready to put out on their own, depending, but they're not out yet. And there are a few that are coming out. So I'm really, really excited about The City Beautiful. It's coming out very soon. It's by Aden. I'm gonna butcher his last name. Please forgive me, Aden. He's so nice. Polydoros, and it's like a Gothic historical queer. Own Voices Jewish book, and it is just gorgeous. So I'm really excited for that one. So that one's coming out pretty soon. And then there is actually a holiday rom-com that's coming out, but I don't know its title because it's not coming out for a year and a half. But like they had their publication announcement and stuff. So that one will come out. That one will be great. And then, there's classic stuff that I know a lot of people probably read, like Chaim Potok, etc. But that's probably a little bit dated now. You can still read it for like the love of it. Oh my goodness. And Rena Rosner just had a new book come out. So her previous book was fantastic, The Sisters of the Winter Wood. And I think it's releasing tonight. Her next one, The Light of the Midnight Stars. I have a pre-order on that, so I'm waiting for that to arrive. Super, super excited about that one coming my way as well. But I gravitate towards science fiction and fantasy. There are some more contemporaries out there that I just don't have as big of a hook in. And then if you like short stories or short story anthologies or queer books, which I do, there is a really great anthology called It's a Whole Spiel. It was edited by Catherine Locke, I believe, as well as Laura Silverman is the other editor. And then, the foreword was by Mayim Bialik, who I extremely enjoy as a producer of art, but also as a scientist because she's actually a neuroscientist as well in real life. So that book is really great too.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been great. Do you have anything to plug, Evalyn, or just let people know how they can keep up with your work and where to
you can find me on Twitter. I am there. I also post a lot of Jewish food, so prepare thyself. There will be writing snippets interspersed with like challah photos But that's me. And I have a website. It's really easy to remember, evalynbroderick.com. I usually keep my DMs open on Twitter for writing questions. Nothing creepy, please.
And creepy podcast invitations.
Yeah, that was actually so fun when that one came in. I was like, oh my God, yay. But I usually, every now and then, like around pitch contests, I'll be like, if anyone wants another look, I know people charge for it. I don't. I just like interacting with other writers and helping them. I haven't done it in a little bit, but then there's actually LGBTQ NB coming up, like its first inaugural event. So I said if anybody is prepping for that, it's on the 15th. So I opened for that, like if anyone wanted to DM me about that. But I'm usually just open if people have writing questions there, or there's a contact me forum on my website or on my email. My writing email is on my website as well. I am agented, so right now most of my stuff is going for trad publish, but there are a few things that I think traditional publishing is just not going to want to do because they don't, they have certain things that they have to meet. They're a publicly owned or traded company and they have profits that they have to make. So indie publishing is something I think about a lot for some of the more, I call them the passion projects, like the things you write for you and then eventually you want to share with others, but you don't either want to subject them to publishing or know that publishing is like trad publishing is not the place for them. So I would put stuff about that on my Twitter or on my website as it comes.
Yay! Well, thank you, Evalyn. This was great.
Thank you guys for having me. This was actually so much fun.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Writer Podcast. Today, I wanted to let all of our listeners know that we recently launched a patron account through Podbean, where you can become a monthly subscriber for as little as $5 a month. Perks for indie authors include having your name and book link listed in our episode show notes and on-air shoutouts. For the first 20 people to subscribe at the $10 or $20 level, we will also place your book link or creator website in the show notes for all previously published episodes. Once we reach our third goal, we will transition from episodes every other week to episodes each week. So if you want more of the Indie Writer Podcast and our wonderful guests, then please head over to indiewriterpodcast.podbean.com and click Become a Patron. We appreciate all of you, and we want to thank the indie author and writing block communities for the continued support. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, or at writingblock.com, no K. Remember to subscribe, share, and tell your friends. Thanks, everyone, and happy writing!